In part 2, let's try categorizing symbiotic interactions. There are 4 major kinds of interactions. There are interactions in which there is a negative effect of species 1 on species 2. We refer to that as competition. There are interactions in which there is a negative impact on species 2, but a positive impact on species 1. Predation, animals eating other animals, is an example. Herbivory, animals eating plants, is another example. Parasitism, one organism parasitizing another organism. So one gets a benefit, the other undergoes a cost. This sometimes goes under the caption of consumer, but I think the term consumer hides the fundamentally different categories of this interaction, positive for one and negative for the other. We have commensalism, in which one species benefits and the other species does not. This is often hard to detect because it's sometimes very difficult to detect whether or not there is a benefit or not to that second species. And lastly, we can have a mutualistic interaction in which both species benefit in a positive way through this symbiotic interaction. So at this point here, we'd ask a clicker question. Is the coral zoanthely symbiosis parasitic, facultative, or obligate? And the answer is, it's facultative. How do we recognize plant-plant interactions that might be recognized as competition? Now, throughout this discussion in the upper left-hand corner, I'm going to describe the nature of that relationship with plus, minus, and 0 symbols. So competition would be a negative relationship for both species. One way we can begin to assess this is through controlled experiments. Here we have a plant growing by itself, and here we have 2 plants competing with each other in full competition. We can dissect this into root competition or shoot competition. And in root competition, we might think of a divider that goes in. In root competition, we might think of a barrier that goes in to prevent one plant from negatively impacting the other in terms of light, but allowing the roots to interact through competition. Or we might think of the alternative, looking at shoot-only competition by putting a dividing plate in so that the roots are not interacting with each other. So it's possible in plant systems to dissect the nature of competition into root competition or shoot competition, or both. Now, water availability can really affect the competitive interactions because there's competition for water. When water stress occurs, water is in short supply, plants compete with each other to obtain water or to obtain nutrients. They can vary in their morphological structure here as a result of this competitive interaction, and the term used for that is a term we've seen before, acclimation. That's the ability of a genotype to express multiple phenotypes as the environment changes. In this case, the plants are competing for water, and so they send out finer and finer root systems to take up the water and the nutrients. On the other hand, there might be competition for light. So in competition for light, we often see that there's a reduced investment in roots, but more of an investment in above-ground materials, such as elongating stems so that one plant can grow on top of the other. Again, this is an acclimation response. One of the simple kinds of competition experiments we might be able to do is to ask what happens if you take a large-seeded plant, a large-seeded organism, and grow it, and you see it grows into large plants. Or you might have a different species that produces small seeds resulting in small plants. If you grow plants with large seeds and small seeds together, you'll often find that they have a competitive interaction and that the taller plants shade out or outcompete the smaller plants. But this isn't always necessarily the case because it depends on other kinds of interactions. For example, let's now recognize that it's not just large seeded plants and small seeded plants in the same environment, but that we have rodents and we have ants. Ants prefer small seeds. That has a negative impact on the small seed population. Rodents prefer large seeds. That has an impact on the large seed population. But when rodents eat large seeds, that can facilitate an interaction so that small seeded plants are able to grow faster because the large seeded plants are gone. So we can have these very significant competitive interactions that are altered by the presence of other organisms in the environment. And so by reducing the density of large seeded plants that are superior to the small seeded, rodents are indirectly facilitating ant populations. Another kind of interaction is a positive negative interaction. Here, I'll show you the classic data of the lynx and the hare. We have data that go back into the mid-1800s, not because ecologists were there collecting data, but because of pelt trading records. In this case, they're pelt trading records from the Hudson Bay Company in Canada. And what you see are cycles between the abundance of the lynx and the abundance of the hare. Typically, what you see is an increase in the abundance of the hare, followed by an increase in the abundance of the lynx, when that food resource is depleted. Of course, the rabbit population has been diminished because of predation, and subsequently, the lynx population also decreases. And so we see this cycle that's been repeated on multi-decadal basis for as long as records have been kept. Another kind of positive negative interaction is not the predation, but herbivory. Now we don't have animals eating other animals, but what we have instead is animals eating plants. That's the term of herbivory, quite common in insects and other arthropods, and it's quite common in mammals. So we can have either grazers, as we talked about in the angiosperm lecture, or we can have browsers eating the trees and shrubs. At this point in the lecture, we'd have a clicker question to have you use one word to describe how plants defend themselves from herbivory. One of the interactions that's difficult to evaluate and show is commensalism, where one species, in this case the orchid, benefits by having an environment in which it can anchor. That is the tree. And there's no indication that the tree suffers from that interaction. That is, unless the branch gets too full of orchids. But typically, examples of commensalism are suggestions of a positive interaction for one species, in this case the orchid in its newfound environment, high above the floor where it gets adequate sunlight, and no negative impact on the host tree.